She did everything right. Almost a year of expenses, saved to the dollar. So why did she wake up at 3 a.m. doing math? The Honda's transmission gave out on a Tuesday in February. Cora heard it before she felt it, a harsh metallic grinding under the floorboards, then a violent shudder as she pulled onto the shoulder of Interstate 94. The old car had finally dropped its transmission, and by the time the tow truck dropped it at the mechanic's lot, she was standing in the freezing sleet, staring at a repair estimate written in greasy blue pen. She stared at the estimate longer than anyone should. Not because she couldn't afford it. The repair wasn't expensive. Watching the balance fall was. Every dollar spent pulled her back to memories she'd spent years trying to outrun. That fear didn't care what the balance actually was. A little over $82,000 sat in a savings account she'd named Do Not Touch. A rebuilt transmission would cost maybe $1,500 installed. She could pay it before lunch and barely notice the difference. Her body noticed anyway.
Her chest tightened. Her breathing turned shallow. She paced the waiting room she didn't need to pace, read the same bulletin board twice. She looked at the balance, shoved the phone into her pocket, lasted maybe 30 seconds, then pulled it out again. Because once the balance started shrinking, her mind never stopped at 1,500. It jumped straight to 82,000, then 80, then 70. Then came the question she could never stop. What if something else happened next? Something always came next. If you'd looked at Cora's life from the outside, you'd have called her responsible. She read every contract twice. Receipts stayed in neat folders. Nothing escaped her attention. She worked as a dental hygienist at a clinic on the north side of town, packed her lunch, drove a paid-off Honda with 140,000 miles on it. She had a cushion most people would envy, close to a year of expenses, built dollar by dollar.
The clinic had been a little quieter lately. One dentist had already left for another practice. Patients sometimes mentioned putting off treatment until next year. Cora noticed all of it. Then she did what she'd always done. She told herself not to think about it until she absolutely had to. On paper, she'd done everything right, but money never sat still for her. It felt less like something she owned and more like something that could get yanked back the second she looked away. To understand that, you have to go back to when she was 15. It was 2008. Cora remembers the year less as a headline and more as a sound, her father's voice getting quieter and quieter through the wall. He'd been a contractor, good with his hands, always busy. Then the work dried up, the way a creek dries up in August, so slowly you don't notice until there's nothing left but cracked mud. She remembers a night when her mother spread the bills across the kitchen table and sorted them into 2 piles. And Cora understood, without being told, that one of those piles was going to have to wait. They lost the house the following spring. There was no sheriff at the door, just boxes and a rented truck, and her dad refusing to let anyone help him carry the couch, because carrying it himself was the last thing he had left to do. Cora made herself a promise at that table, somewhere between the 2 piles of bills. She was never going to get caught the way her mum and dad had. She would never watch her own kids sort the mail into pay and pray. So she built. Her first job was scooping ice cream at 16, and she kept most of it. Through hygienist school, she lived on rice and clearance rack everything. And once she had a real paycheck, she started stacking it away like sandbags before a flood. Not every paycheck made it into savings. Student loans took years to pay off. More than once, she quietly helped her parents after they got back on their feet. Even so, year after year, the account kept growing. The problem is, the flood never came. And somehow, that was worse. Because the fund grew, but the fear grew right alongside it. Every time the balance ticked up, Cora felt a flicker of relief that lasted about as long as a struck match. Then the math would start again. Was a year enough? What if she got sick and couldn't work? What if the car finally quit on the highway? What if the clinic closed? What if? What if? She had become a person who kept a fire extinguisher in every room and still lay awake smelling smoke. Spending anything made her stomach clench. When her friends invited her out to a cabin for a weekend, she said the drive was too far. When her chronic back pain flared up in the fall, she stretched before work, lived on heating pads, and reached for ibuprofen on the worst days. Every temporary fix felt easier than spending money on physical therapy. Until one day, it wasn't enough anymore. People sometimes mistook her for being cheap. They couldn't see that spending felt almost physically painful to her. Watching it drop put her right back at that kitchen table, 15 years old, listening to her parents count change. So there she was in February, standing in the freezing sleet, with more in the bank than she'd ever had in her life, shaking like she was broke. She called her sister that night. Bree lived 2 states away, taught 3rd grade, and had maybe $900 to her name on a good day, which, in Cora's mind, made her the reckless one. Cora expected sympathy. She wanted someone to say, "God, that's awful, you poor thing." Bree listened to the whole thing, the blown transmission and the tow truck and the number running in Cora's head. Then she was quiet for a second, the way she got when she was picking her words. "Okay, but Cor, you have 82 grand, Bree said, her voice stripped of its usual sympathy. "I have exactly $900 right now, and I sleep better than you do. You sound exactly like Mom and Dad right before the bank took the house. You spent years making sure nothing could hurt you. Somewhere along the way, that started hurting you instead." Cora almost argued. "Easy for you to say," she said quietly. "You've never watched a family lose everything." Bree didn't answer right away. "No," she finally said. "I watched the same parents you did." Silence settled between them. "I just don't think they'd want you spending the rest of your life acting like they're still losing the house." Cora looked out the kitchen window. She couldn't think of a single thing to say, so she changed the subject. They talked a while longer about nothing much, the way sisters do. But after Cora hung up, in the dark of her kitchen, she kept turning that last part over. You never actually feel safe in it. And slowly, on her own, she followed it the rest of the way down. She'd paid for that broken transmission twice tonight, hadn't she? Once with money she'd always meant to spend, and once with a whole evening of her life she'd never get back. The second one costing her a lot more than $1,500. She'd spent 10 years building a house and had been sleeping out in the yard. For several days, nothing really changed. Some habits refused to disappear. She caught herself checking the balance. At the grocery store, her hand drifted toward the cheaper brand without thinking. Big purchases still made her pause. But Bree's words refused to leave. Living inside it like a prisoner. The sentence annoyed her, mostly because every day it sounded a little more true. She didn't change overnight. Real people rarely do. But a week later, she sat down at her kitchen table, the same kind of table, she realized, where she'd made that promise at 15, and opened the banking app. She looked at that account, "Do Not Touch," and she did something small and strange. She renamed it. She called it Peace. It was a stupid little thing to do. She almost felt embarrassed doing it. But naming a thing tells you what it's for, and for 10 years hers had been named after fear. An emergency fund is built around the worst day you can picture. Every time you look at it, you're staring straight at the disaster it's waiting for. Cora didn't want to keep a shrine to her worst day. She wanted the money to buy her something while she was still around to use it. She wanted to sit in her own kitchen at night and not feel her jaw clenched shut. So she made herself some new rules. Not rules about saving more. She had that down cold. Rules about letting herself actually spend a little of it.
And they did not come easy. First thing, she booked the physical therapist for the chronic back pain she'd ignored for 2 years. A hazard of leaning over dental chairs. $400 out of pocket for the first block of sessions, and her stomach still dropped when the card went through. The old reflex doesn't just pack up and leave because you asked it to. She sat in the parking lot afterward and made herself say it out loud, feeling like a fool. This is what the money is for. It just bought me a back that doesn't hurt. It felt clumsy, like writing with her left hand. She did it anyway. Driving home, she caught herself calculating how many extra appointments it would take to earn that $400 back. She almost laughed. The voice doing the math sounded exactly like 15-year-old Cora. She still felt the old panic. This time, she didn't hand it the steering wheel. A month later, she bought a plane ticket to go see Bree. She'd skipped the trip 2 years running, always filing it under want, never need. She almost cancelled twice. But standing in Bree's cramped kitchen that Saturday, both of them laughing at pancakes Bree had burned black on one side, Cora caught herself running the math out of pure habit. And then, for once, she let it go. Let the number be a little smaller. Let the weekend be worth what it was worth. Each time got a hair easier. Not because she stopped caring about money. She still tracked every dollar, still saved hard, still checked her statements line by line. But she was learning the difference between being careful and being scared stiff. Careful paid her bills early and kept the gas tank full. Scared kept her up at 2 a.m. running numbers for disasters that never showed up. And then, that summer, one of them actually did. The clinic lost its lease and 2 of its dentists inside the same month. On a Thursday, Cora's manager called her into the cramped back office, couldn't quite hold her eyes, and told her they were cutting her hours down to almost nothing, which everybody in the room knew was just the slow way of saying goodbye. She drove home with her hands locked on the wheel, and the old dread came up fast. 15-year-old Cora sat right up in her chest, already reaching for the mail, already sorting it into pay and pray. Her breath went shallow at the first red light. But at the second red light, she noticed something. She had peace in the bank, real months of it, and this time it didn't feel like a number she was terrified to touch. It felt like time. Like a few months where nobody could make her panic. The scared version of Cora almost won. For the first 2 weeks, she woke up at 4 a.m. in a cold sweat, compulsively refreshing job boards and almost accepting a toxic, low-paying role at a corporate dental chain just to stop the bleeding. But every time her finger hovered over reply, she forced herself to open the banking app and look at the word. Peace. She picked up a few temp shifts to slow the drain on her savings, just enough to keep the panic at bay while she figured out what she actually wanted next. Some weeks there was plenty of work. Other weeks her phone barely rang. Saving had never been her problem. Learning to spend without panic, that was the skill she'd been missing. It was simply enough to buy herself another week, to choose carefully instead of desperately. It took 11 weeks. Watching the balance slide down still stung every single time. But the temp work bought her a bridge, and the fund bought her the right to say no to the wrong jobs. In the 11th week, she took a spot at a pediatric practice across town.
Better people, saner hours, work that didn't leave her hollowed out at the end of the day. She could never have held out for it on an empty account and a frayed nerve. Sitting in the parking lot after signing the paperwork, Cora opened her banking app out of habit. The balance was lower than it had been 11 weeks earlier. For a split second, the old panic reached for her. Then her eyes landed on the account name. Peace. She smiled, locked her phone, and drove home without checking the balance again. Months later, Cora was scraping ice off the Honda's windshield. She paused, listening to the engine, the new transmission humming quietly to itself. And she thought of the night she'd stood shivering in the mechanic's lot, $82,000 to her name, and not 1 ounce of peace. She thinks about that night sometimes. The money couldn't have kept the gears from stripping. It couldn't keep the clinic from folding either. All it ever did was buy her a little time to breathe before she had to decide anything. And it turned out that was the part she'd needed the whole time. She finished scraping the glass, got into a warm car that was hers, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the number in her head was quiet. The strange part was, she hadn't become richer. If anything, she had less money than the day her transmission failed. But somewhere along the way, she'd finally become the thing she'd been trying to buy all those years. Safe. Have you ever felt like Cora? Building a fortress to keep the disaster out, only to realize you're living inside it like a prisoner? We spend so much time learning how to save, how to hustle, and how to prepare for the worst-case scenario. But rarely do we talk about the psychology of actually allowing ourselves to use that money to buy peace of mind. If Cora's story resonated with you today, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments. What is one small thing you've done recently to shift your mindset from financial fear to financial peace? And if you want to explore more stories and conversations about the emotional side of money, personal growth, and building a life that actually feels good, not just looks good on paper, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for